Tell me something. All of you up there, back home in the Walk Hill Valley. Oh, hell, all of you in those so-called small towns all across this country. How many times have you heard this or even said it yourselves? If your family has been there long enough, you're probably related to just about everyone else there, one way or another. Mathematically speaking, there's more truth to that than you might think. But I'll get to that later. 60 years ago, when I was still a kid, behind these old eyes, I am still a kid. I knew almost nothing about my family history, didn't even know what the word genealogy meant. On my mother's side of the family, I knew I had a great-grandmother living with my maternal grandparents. She was in her 80s. To me, that was unbelievably, impossibly old. Of course, now, I'm not that all far from 80 myself. That's all I knew about her. Didn't even know her name, other than great-grandma. On my father's side of the family, I knew even less, sort of. My paternal grandparents lived on the farm with us, and I spent a lot of time with them. I knew they had brothers and sisters, and they would come to the farm to visit, and we would go visit them a lot. They even had a few cousins that I knew of. Occasionally, there were some rather large family gatherings, usually after funerals. I heard them talk about things going on at the present time, but never about their past. Then, eventually, they all passed away, and their history died with them. However, my grandfather, Harry Score, who outlived pretty much all of them, did talk about his past. Like I said before, he gave me my deep appreciation of and curiosity about history. He told me dozens of stories about his past, his years as a young man. He told me so much that I actually was able to write a fictional book about him. I have it recorded here on my YouTube channel. It's called Ghost Whistle. Although the plot has nothing to do with him, all the anecdotes scattered throughout the story are true. Still, there was a problem with that. He never talked about anything or anyone who came before him. He never talked about his parents or about his family back in England, except for two mysterious claims. First, he claimed he had a first cousin, Charlie, who was killed in World War I. Second, he claimed he was born in England in a place called Lower Dunny. Adding to that claim, he said they were too poor to live in the next town over called Upper Dunny. After he passed away in March of 1976, I asked my parents and brothers about those claims. None of them ever heard of a cousin Charlie, and my father even told me it wasn't true. As far as Lower Dunny was concerned, we searched every map of Great Britain we could find and found nothing close to either Upper or Lower Dunny anywhere in the British Isles. Then, years later, along came something known as the Internet and websites such as Ancestry.com and Google Maps. It turns out, just as I began to suspect, the Dunnies did not exist. But the Donheads did. There was the parish of Donhead St. Andrew, down in a hollow, and Donhead St. Mary, just up the road on a hill. And yes, Harry was born down in Donhead St. Andrew. Furthermore, there was a Charlie Score, the son of my great-grandfather's brother. He emigrated to the U.S. sometime before World War I and enlisted in the Army. He was killed in the Battle of Belleau Wood in June of 1918. I suppose one good reason Harry never talked about his time in England was because he was born there June 20th, 1892, and arrived in America September 21st that same year, almost exactly 3 months later. The only time I ever remember hearing him say anything about his parents was a time he pointed to an old rocking chair he had and said his mother rocked him on it as they crossed the Atlantic. That same chair is right here next to me by my drawing table. Oh, he also mentioned his father once when he showed me an old root cane that he claimed belonged to his father and how he made it from a wild rose bush over there in England. I have that here too. It hangs on the wall over the chair. Now, thanks to the internet and other family members, over the last several years, we uncovered volumes about our ancestors on both sides of the family. We found the usual names and dates and locations and connections one would find when digging into a host of documents such as census records, birth certificates, and deeds on both sides of the Atlantic. We were able to go back several generations and so far several centuries. Well, most of that stuff is amazingly interesting to my family, but not necessarily to you, so I'll skip over just about all of it, except for some nifty tidbits. On my mother's side, there were doctors, ministers, war heroes, a Medal of Honor recipient, 2 founding families of Walden, New York, a member of George Washington's military staff, a passenger on the Mayflower, and a colleague of William the Conqueror way back in 1066. On my father's side, the Scores, there were farmers, and more farmers, lots of farmers, large families of farmers, very prolific in reproduction. Hey, they were a healthy bunch. And there were war heroes in that family too. 3 gave their lives in World War I, and 1 perished in World War II. Ironically, his name was Robert Score. Back in 2017, Bob Jr. and I went over to England and found his name on a memorial plaque in the parish church of Oakford Fitzpaine, the ancestral hub of the bulk of the Score ancestors. A short drive down the road, we found Donhead St. Andrew. Sure enough, at the center of it, down in a hollow, was the parish church Harry was baptized in. We even found the road where he was born. Oddly, he was up on a hill, Barker's Hill to be exact. Unfortunately, we had no idea of the exact address or which house, even though there were only a few. Wouldn't you know, a few weeks ago, Bob Jr. gets an email from a distant cousin we didn't know existed, a direct descendant of Harry's sister. In the email was a few photographs from an old picture album. One of the pictures was a house with Barker's Hill written at the bottom. We remember seeing that house, although at that moment we had no idea it was the house where Harry was born. Imagine that. Finally, about that mathematical truth I started out with. Look around. You'd be surprised who you might be related to. Think about this. I did the math. My 10th great-grandfather, Thomas Rogers, a passenger on the Mayflower in 1620, was one of 2,048 10th great-grandparents. The same number for any of you if you compute back that far. And for all of you a few generations farther along, you can double that number at least 2 more times. Anyway, 2,048 people of just 1 generation I directly descended from. So, here I am today in Central Florida, about 1,500 miles from Plymouth Rock and 400 years from Thomas Rogers. My granddaughter calls me the other day, asking me details about the family tree going back to the Mayflower. Why? Because her friend, a young girl of partial Asian descent, was seeking information about her lineage to her 12th great-grandfather, Thomas the same Rogers. So, you think the guy across the street or the gal down the block are different from you? Whether they think different, talk different, act different, or look different, go back far enough, we're all related somehow. Look past whatever differences you see. There are, right now, almost 8 billion of us. 8 billion variations of a single theme. We are all one family. Hey, like they say, you just can't make this stuff up.